Um, so this altar, someone was asking about the altar. We're doing this series on the leading causes of life. This is our third part of the series. And the series comes from Marsha McPhee, who's kind of a worship arts guru in our conference, and actually all over the country now. But so this is a series that she came up with, and her idea for the altar was to put rusty things and plants and flowers, so new life coming out of sort of the, tangled and rusty messes of our lives. So, so that's what the rusty tools and things are, and then the plants coming, offering new life out of that. Anyway, we talked the first week about choosing life, and the second week, last week, we talked about the connections and how important connections are in our life. And it's really the air that we breathe. In this third chapter of this book that we're using for this, it's called The Leading Causes of Life, they talk about coherence. Well, it's kind of a funny phrase, so you'll catch on more to what that means as we go along. But that chapter starts with this story, and I wanted to share it with you because I thought it helped me understand what they meant by coherence. So Larry Pray is one of the authors of this book, and this is his writing. Were it not for the loss, that Monday morning held nothing special. I read the paper, listened to the news, drank a cup of coffee, completed my workout, and showered to start my day. I opened the blue drawer in the kitchen that held my diabetes blood testing equipment and reached for the meter and the small bottle of test strips, and suddenly I realized I had no idea how to make sense of the numbers. The task I had performed 1,000 times eluded me. Connie was in the living room, and I went to ask for help and began to speak to her. And to my astonishment, the clear sentence I had in mind came out gibberish. I knew what I wanted to say, but every attempt to speak a succinct word ended in incoherent gibberish. Something happened, I wanted to say, but out came a profusion of punctuated, unintelligible sounds. Connie immediately called the hospital, and we went to the car. She couldn't find the keys, but I saw them there in the ignition, and I tried to tell her I had them. Here they are, my mind said, as more gibberish streamed forth from my lips. We arrived at the hospital, and I saw friends and my doctor, but I could not say their names, and I couldn't speak anything to them. For the rest of the morning, every clear thought, every desired expression emerged in utter and complete chaos. Nobody knew what was happening except Connie, who had correctly assessed this serious situation. Some thought it was a TIA. My doctor thought it was stress because the previous day I had told my congregation I would leave for a while to heal from the trauma of a stroke I'd had in November. Perhaps my words matched the incoherence I felt in my soul as I prepared to leave my church and my town and my friends that formed the world of meaning I loved and respected. It turned out, of course, to neither be a TIA or stress, but a second stroke that hit the language center of my brain, that prompted that Monday morning chaos. Take away coherence, and the gift of community cannot be named. The loss of coherence is an unmistakable signal that something is amiss in the fundamental health of individuals. On like manner, what is true for the individual applies to the church, and to the community, and to the nation. Coherence and the world of meaning it invites us to share is the leading cause of life. Last week I was walking with my grandchildren in the park, and we saw this group of teenagers having a party, and they had set up volleyball, and they were playing Twister in the grass. And I had forgotten about Twister. You all know that game, Twister, with the colored dots on a piece of plastic, and somebody spins the dial and says, right hand on blue, left foot on red, left hand on yellow. Anyway, you're pretty much all mixed up very quickly. As a youth director, we used to play that a lot. We'd have competitions, and the kids always wanted me to compete. But I know better, so I would be the person who spun the dial or the photographer. Those were my two roles. I don't particularly care for being all twisted up in life or on Twister. And I think that's probably true for most of us. You know, we're uncomfortable when we're trying to do contortions, and we're uncomfortable when life throws those at us. It's much more comfortable when things are clear, and we know what we are, and who we are, and what we're going to do. So, as I said, we're in this sermon series. We talked about choosing life, we talked about connection, and now we're talking about this coherence. So coherence is the sense that life makes sense. Sometimes it's hard to find coherence in an incoherent world. But when we do, you know, we find that we have purpose and hope. Coherence is knowing not just in our heads, but in our bones and in our hearts and our souls, deep, way down deep, you know, that we are doing what God has created us to do, that we're being who God created us to be. Coherence is getting ourselves untwisted and getting clear about what and who we are. We know this is no small task, right? Even the most successful, most faithful, most together people find themselves twisted up once in a while. But as people of faith, we believe also in this lifeline, right? Which is God's love and grace that time and time again watches over us and gives us this second chance to straighten out, you know, whatever twists and turns are happening in our lives. In this morning's scripture that Tyree read, Jesus just announced his purpose and proclaimed this hope that would sustain his life and ministry. He stood up in his home synagogue, his home congregation, and he read from the prophet Isaiah word for word, announcing that those words now applied to him. It was his call to ministry. The words are very familiar. You've heard them. You just heard them. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. And according to Luke's story, the people in the synagogue were amazed by his words. But they were also maybe a little jealous, I don't know, but they certainly doubted the authenticity of his call. Because he was a kid that they knew. And even though he'd grown into a man, they still, I think, saw him as a kid. It's one of those mistakes of the church. It's one of the biggest mistakes we make, is that we watch our children grow up and we never allow them to become adults in their own church. We have a hard time seeing them in a new role, but it's important that we do that we, as they become adults, become a part of the adult part of Temple, right? They get on committees, they become a creative part of our teams, and not just youth group members who never get to grow up. I don't think we should be surprised particularly by the response at the synagogue, because it is, like I said, so often our response. One thing you need to understand about Jesus is Jesus was not a kid, right? He was 30 years old. Now that's young in our time, but in his time, he had lived a pretty full life. He was getting ready to make a huge change as a mature adult. So here he stands announcing these intentions to now begin living as God's instrument of God's grace for others. He'd been called beyond himself and into the lives of others. You know, Jesus, we think, must have been pondering this most of his life, right? We know that at 12, he knew enough when he went to the temple to tell his parents that he would be about God's business. Of course. I will be about the business of my Father. But we don't know when the rest was clear. We know he had those early inklings, but a lot of years had passed, right? And we don't have anything recording his life during that time. But that day, there in the synagogue, surrounded by the people who knew him best, Jesus announced his intention to live his life with a new purpose and meaning. Coherence. It's all about living our lives with purpose and meaning, about discovering how our lives can be lived better, about how we can look beyond ourselves and into the lives of others. Some people are very clear about what they're here to do. There's a story about Yogi Berra, who's a well-known catcher for the New York Yankees, and Hank Aaron, who at the time was a chief power hitter for the Milwaukee Braves. And the teams were playing in the World Series, and Yogi was known for his ceaseless chatter when batters got up. wanted to distract the Milwaukee batters as well as kind of pep up his teammates. So when Hank Aaron came to the plate, Yogi tried to distract him by saying, "Hey, Henry, you're holding the bat wrong. You're supposed to hold it so you can read the trademark." Aaron didn't say anything, but when the next pitch came, he hit it into the stands. So he rounded the bases and he tagged home plate, and then he looked up at Yogi Berra and he said, "I didn't come here to read. He came to do what he came to do, and he did it." So there are a lot of days when we aren't that clear about what we're doing, right? We have times when we can't figure out our lives. We try to understand what's going on around us, how we can maybe be a part of that, make things a little better for someone. I have felt very inept since I moved to San Francisco because the need is so prevalent and so in my face all the time. And I always feel like I'm not doing enough, I'm not giving enough. You know, there's not enough money in my pocket anyway to fill all the cups I have to pass on my way to the bank when I walk down Mission Street. And in front of my Safeway store, I've told you this before, there's just a line of people who want money, people who are selling things, people who need me to sign things. It's just this exhausting exercise in futility for me because I want to help all these people. I want to fix whatever's wrong in their lives and make things better for them. And I don't have those resources. I think sometimes we can get to the point of being so overwhelmed that we stop. That we can't figure out what to do, so we don't do anything. We get backed into a safe corner. Tennessee Williams tells a story about Jacob Brodsky, who was a shy Russian Jew whose father owned a bookstore and wanted him, his son, to go to college. The boy, on the other hand, didn't want to go to college. He wanted to stay at home and marry his high school sweetheart. She was a French girl. She was effusive and vital and ambitious, and it was a good balance to his sort of contemplative, quiet nature. Well, a couple of months after he was away at school, his father grew ill and died. So he returned home, he buried his father, and he married his sweetheart. And the couple moved into the apartment above the bookstore, and he began to manage the bookstore. And that fit him very well, but it cramped her. She wanted more adventure, and she found it when an agent came who praised her for her beautiful voice and enticed her to tour Europe with a vaudeville group. Anyway, Brodsky was devastated. At their party, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a key to the front door of the bookstore. And he said, "You better keep this, because you're going to want it someday. Your love is not so much less than mine that you can get away from it. You will come back sometime, and I will be here waiting." She kissed him and left, and to escape the immensity of pain, Brodsky withdrew deep into his bookstore and took on reading as someone else might take to drink. He spoke little, he did little. He could be found most of the time at a large desk in the back of the store, immersed in his books, while waiting for his love to return. Nearly 15 years later, at Christmas time, she did come back. And when Brodsky looked up from his desk and saw her, he mistook her for just a customer in the store and asked if he could help her find a book. The fact that he didn't recognize her startled her. And when she gained possession of herself, she said, "I want a book, but I've forgotten the name of it." And then she told him of childhood sweethearts and the story of a newly married couple who lived in an apartment above a bookstore, and the story of a young, ambitious wife who went to seek a career and who enjoyed great success but could never relinquish the key that her husband gave her when they parted. And she told him this story because she thought it would bring him back to himself. But he showed no recognition. So gradually she realized that she that he had lost touch with his heart's desire, that he no longer knew the purpose of his waiting and grieving, only that he remembered his waiting and his grieving. And she said, you must remember it, the story of Lila and Jacob. But after a long, bewildered pause, he said, there is something familiar about that story. I think I've read it somewhere. It comes to me that it must be something by Tolstoy. And she put the key down on the desk, and she left the shop. And Brodsky returned to his desk, to his reading, unaware that the love he waited for had just come and gone. The world around him had lost its meaning because in the face of such immense pain, he withdrew from it. And in withdrawing, he lost sight of his own purpose. It'd be so much easier if God would just, speak to us through burning bushes and boiling clouds and text messages, right? If we knew exactly what it was God wanted us to do in each of these situations that we run across. For me, I can usually tell if something is a calling, if God is actually calling me to something, if it meets some criteria that I come up with. One is that doing it has to exhilarate me and terrify me in about equal balance. It also has to tap into my spiritual gifts. If I don't have the gifts or the resources to help that situation, then I'm wrong to get involved because I can't do anything. If I stop to try to fix everybody I come across on Mission Street, I'm going to run out of steam and money and resources very quickly. I have to see how my gifts fit the great needs of the world and do what I can do. That is coherence. Understanding that we belong to God and finding God's meaning in our lives and purpose for our living is what we're about. As a people of faith, this has everything to do with moving beyond ourselves and into the lives of others as instruments of God's grace. And it's not always easy. We'll get twisted up. We'll be inconsistent. There are times when we find ourselves so lost that we'll be tempted to withdraw. But with God loving us beyond measure and filling us with God's Spirit, we won't stay there. We'll get up again. We'll take baby steps again until we're able to move with determination and intention. I know it would be nice to end this message by giving each of you a little note with what I think your spiritual gift is and how I think you could use it. The problem is that's not for me to do. That's for you to figure out, right? What are your gifts? What has God entrusted you with that might be meaningful in your life here at Temple, in your community where you live, whether it's nearby or farther away or not even in San Francisco. We come from all over, I know, in this church. But it comes from establishing a deep connection with God. That's your work. That's your first priority, right? Because you're not going to know anything else until you have a relationship with God that helps feed you the information and direction you need. So I want to invite you to make time this week to work on those things that deepen your relationship with God, to open yourselves up to prayer and study, and not just prayer at the end of the day when you're tired and you're going to fall asleep. We're all good at that. Try to be more intentional. Try to do it when you're awake. Wake up in the morning and pray, and read, and worship, and praise. Give God back a little of what God's given you, which is a tremendous amount of time and grace and love. So, that's your challenge for this week, to open yourselves up to the movement and direction of the Spirit, to get untwisted, and to find coherence in your life.